Marissa Shin. In July 1837, around 6 p.m., 13-year-old Marissa Shin left her home in Burnaby, British Columbia, Canada, to visit a nearby Tim Hortons. She never made it back. Her mother attempted to call her, but Marissa's phone was turned off. When she still hadn't returned by 11 p.m., her mother reported her missing. Initially, the police didn't treat the case with urgency. Believing she might be with friends or that her phone battery had died, officers were hesitant to act. However, Marissa's mother stressed that she was always home before 8 p.m. This prompted police to check her phone's GPS, which had last pinged in Central Park about an hour earlier. Authorities then began searching the park's footpaths. Before long, an officer in the park's southeast corner discovered a cartoon owl-shaped pink wallet and a phone switch near a small trail. Nearby, they also found a student ID with the name Marissa. At 1:10 a.m., less than 2 hours after she was reported missing, police discovered Marissa's body near Patterson Avenue. She was declared dead at the scene and was still wearing the same outfit from earlier that day. An autopsy later confirmed that she had been sexually assaulted and strangled. Authorities classified her death as a homicide resulting from a random attack. As investigators worked to retrace her final steps, surveillance footage showed Marissa leaving her apartment at 6:02 p.m. A few minutes later, at 6:09 p.m., she was seen entering a Tim Hortons located on the 6200 block of McKay Avenue near Central Boulevard. She was dressed in a black t-shirt and denim shorts. Marissa stayed in the restaurant for about an hour and a half and was last seen on camera exiting at 7:37 p.m. Before she exits, she places her plastic iced coffee cup into the recycling bin and her garbage into the waste bin. Marissa was then seen heading towards the Central Park. The murder of the young girl within a large city park became the top priority case for the police. Investigators interviewed more than 2,000 and followed several leads. Despite an extensive investigation, no one was charged. Then on September 7, 2018, police announced that they have arrested a man in connection with Marissa's murder. 28-year-old Ibrahim Ali was charged with the first-degree murder of Marissa Shin. Using the DNA found on Marissa, authorities used DNA phenotyping to determine that the girl's killer was likely a man of a Middle Eastern descent. DNA phenotyping, also known as snapshot DNA, is a technique where scientists analyze DNA samples to digitally reconstruct the facial features of a perpetrator. This includes details such as hair color, height, ethnicity, gender, and even facial structure, aiding in the identification of the suspect. Genetic phenotyping in Marissa's case suggested that the suspect was a man aged between 25 and 35, with dark hair and eyebrows, light brown skin, a slender facial structure, a long nose, and a noticeable chin groove. DNA evidence further pointed to a Middle Eastern origin, specifically from northern areas such as Syria, Lebanon, northern Turkey, and parts of Iraq. Using this profile, police requested that men of Middle Eastern descent living near Burnaby's Central Park voluntarily submit DNA samples to help narrow down potential suspects. It remains whether Ibrahim Ali submitted his DNA willingly or was identified through familial DNA tracing. At the time, Ibrahim Ali, a 28-year-old refugee from Syria, was residing in Burnaby, British Columbia. He had no criminal history and worked as an exterior wall decorator in the construction industry. Ibrahim had come to Canada due to the conflict in Syria and the ongoing refugee crisis. Refugees arriving in Canada fall into two main categories: those directly sponsored by the government, ranging from 25,000 to 30,000 people, and privately sponsored refugees, supported by relatives, church groups, or non-profit organizations. Abraham's brother had been a government-sponsored refugee in Canada, prompting a community group on Bowen Island to initiate efforts to reunite Abraham's remaining family members. With successful fundraising, they sponsored Ibrahim and two other brothers along with their families, aiming to bring them together after being separated by the conflict. Ibrahim had arrived in Canada as a refugee in April 2017, just 3 months before the murder of Marissa. Ibrahim became a permanent resident of Canada sometime before his first court appearance on September 1438, with the trial initially set for October 1238, but the trial was subsequently pushed back to September 2022 and then again to January 2023. The trial eventually commenced in April 2023, nearly 6 years after Marissa's murder. When asked for his plea in court, Ibrahim Ali said 3 times through a Kurdish-speaking interpreter that he did not kill Marissa. The trial encountered several unexpected developments when Dr. Tracy Pickett, the forensic expert for the prosecution, was discovered dead in a wooded area near the site of Marissa's murder. Authorities eventually concluded her death as a suicide, attributing it to her enduring struggle with depression, which was exacerbated by the emotional toll of Marissa's murder. During the trial, prosecution presented evidence and told the court that Marissa had been sexually assaulted and strangled, and that the semen found inside her body matched Ibrahim's DNA. Ibrahim's lawyer resorted to baseless accusations against the deceased, insinuating Marissa was a troubled teen who had bad relations with her mother. He claimed that the girl wasn't the innocent depicted in a rose-colored portrayal at the trial and may have found Ibrahim attractive, further suggesting that she had consensual sex with Ibrahim. He even claimed that after consensual sex, Ibrahim left and that someone else may have murdered Marissa. These unfounded allegations sparked outrage. Marissa's brother accused Ibrahim Ali's legal team of tarnishing her reputation during the trial. Meanwhile, the defense attorney reported receiving death threats, including a letter and a voicemail in which the caller threatened to knock out his teeth and harm his client, saying, "I'm gonna cut him." Citing these threats, the lawyer requested that the trial be relocated to a secure courtroom to protect the defense team and their families. However, the judge stated that he was unaware of any available secure courtroom, and the trial continued in its original location. On the final day of the proceedings, Marissa's father was arrested by Vancouver police for allegedly bringing a loaded Glock pistol into the courtroom with the intention of killing the defense attorney. He was later released as police continued their investigation. Ultimately, Ibrahim Ali was found guilty of first-degree murder. Sentencing has not yet occurred, but under Canadian law, a first-degree murder conviction results in a mandatory life sentence with no chance of parole for 25 years. Moving on to the next case. Lisa Lindstone. In February 2010, 51-year-old Lisa Lindstone was living in Dallas, Texas. A graduate of Mesquite High School, she had worked in the advertising department at the Dallas Morning News from 1991 until February 2005. Lisa struggled with financial issues and dealt with depression and anxiety. She shared an apartment with her partner of 15 years, Sherry Henry. The couple cared for 2 dogs and 26 cats. Lisa was passionate about rescuing stray animals. She was last seen on June 4, 2010, by a neighbor who later reported her missing on June 20th. This happened after Lisa failed to show up for a planned dinner and didn't pick up a friend from the airport as expected. Police responded by visiting the apartment Lisa shared with Sherry. She told them that nothing was wrong and was not unusual for Lisa to drop out of sight. The police could not find any evidence that Lisa was in danger or that a crime occurred, so they closed the case. Lisa's friends, on the other hand, believed that something was very wrong and kept calling Lisa's home, but Sherry told him that Lisa was not available. On June 29th, one of Lisa's friends again asked the police to check on her welfare, as she had still not been seen. When investigators checked again at her apartment, they found a couple's 2 dogs and 26 cats living in awful conditions. They were flea-infested and covered with feces. Animal control officials seized all of the animals. Lisa's friends said that since Lisa was such an animal lover, she would not have allowed this to happen. On July 2nd, almost 4 weeks since Lisa was last seen, a friend of hers noticed Sherry driving Lisa's Cadillac to a dumpster behind a nearby store. Sherry then emptied a few trash bags into the dumpster. After Sherry moved out, one of Lisa's friends searched the dumpster near their apartment and discovered many of Lisa's personal items, including family photos and treasured heirlooms. Lisa's friends promptly informed the police about the discovery. Following this, investigators obtained a warrant to search the apartment Lisa and Sherry had shared, although the findings of that search have never been publicly disclosed. While Sherry Henry was never officially named a suspect, authorities noted her apparent lack of interest in locating Lisa. Lisa Stone is described as a Caucasian woman with brown hair, often dyed blonde, brown eyes, standing 5 feet 7 inches tall, and weighing around 125 pounds. Anyone with information about her disappearance is urged to contact the Dallas Police Department. Moving on to the next case. Ali Kalikasari. Ali Kalikasari was born on December 6, 1935, in Isojoki, Finland, and was the youngest of 6 siblings. She was only 17 years old when she vanished in 1953, and her disappearance remains one of the most well-known and enduring unsolved cases in Finnish history. On Sunday, May 17, 1953, Kaleki rode her bicycle 8 miles to attend church. Deeply devout, she worked in her parish's administrative office. That day, after returning from church, Kaleki told her parents she felt unusually tired and went to her room to rest. Something they found odd, but not alarming. Later that evening, around 6 p.m., she left again on her bicycle, this time heading to an evening prayer meeting. Friends of Kaleki reported that she had seemed anxious and uneasy throughout the day. While the exact cause of her fear is unknown, she expressed concern about making the journey home alone that night. On her way back, Kaleki traveled part of the route with a friend, but the two parted ways near a milk processing plant around 10:30 p.m. About 10 minutes later, a witness reported seeing her roughly a mile beyond the crossroads where she and her friend had separated. That would be the last confirmed sighting of the 17-year-old. Her parents were not initially concerned by her absence, as Kaleki sometimes stayed overnight with friends. But when she still hadn't returned after several days, the police launched a search on May 20th. 30 local residents joined the effort, but no sign of Kaleki or her bicycle was found. Word quickly began to spread about her disappearance, and the following day, the witness who saw her on May 17th came forward. On May 21st, a specialist detective from Vesa was brought in to handle the investigation. The search for the 17-year-old was widened to include marshy areas and forest land with over 100 people volunteering to help the search. The following day, May 22nd, a farmer and his son who were out transporting milk on the same road on which Kaleki was last seen saw some odd clues. They saw bike tracks, footprints, car tracks, and even some shattered glass. It appeared to the pair as if there had been a struggle. While they alerted police as quickly as possible, by the time authorities arrived at the scene, much of the evidence had been disturbed or destroyed by other traffic on the road. There was no trace of the shattered glass either. In the initial weeks following Kaleki's disappearance, the case was far from cold. Just a week after the 17-year-old went missing, several witnesses came forward to report a cream-colored car which had been driving along the road Kaleki had used to get home, the same one on which she was last seen. One 12-year-old eyewitness told law enforcement that they had seen a blond man driving the car with a bike in the trunk on the night of May 17th. They added that there were 2 other men in the car, one of average build, the other one large. The car was driving fast with the lights off despite the fact that it was late at night. This same car was seen by a mother and a daughter who were sitting on their porch in the village of Euro. The car drove past and had a tire sticking out of the trunk. Half an hour later, the car returned. However, despite the amount of eyewitnesses who recalled seeing the car, it could not be located, nor could the driver who was last seen inside of it. A month later, on July 22nd, 2 people who were out picking berries deep in a forest saw a bike tire in the nearby marshland. Upon closer inspection, they found a bike in the low water. Both tires had been deflated, likely in the hopes that it would sink more easily, and it was located hundreds of meters from the main road. There were traces of rust on the bike, but no other damage to it, prompting the belief that Kaleki had been purposefully abducted and had not perished in some sort of tragic accident. Due to the isolated location in which the bike was hidden, authorities determined that the perpetrator must have known the area well. When that same area had been searched in May, the water levels had been high, and although detectors were utilized, nothing was found. This led police to believe that the bike had been dumped there at a later time. However, the bike was quickly returned to Kaleki's parents and was not thoroughly examined, which possibly led to a loss of evidence. In October, the road on which Kaleki had last been seen was searched again. On October 10th, something finally was found. It was the 17-year-old shoe wrapped in her own scarf along with one sock belonging to a man. The items had been tied together with a black woolen thread, and teeth marks observed on the scarf suggested to authorities that it had been used as a gag. The owner of the sock has never been identified. Like the bike, police believe that the shoe had been placed there later, as it was not seen during initial searches. Just one day later, on October 11th, a searcher noticed a dry pine stick pointing out of a nearby tussock. The shoe had been found close by. The searcher pulled on the stick, noticing that the end was sharpened. A foul smell began to emanate from the area, and so the authorities were alerted. Underneath the grass and soil, about 200 meters from the road, was the body of the 17-year-old Kaleki Sari. The body was naked from the waist down. Kaleki's head wrapped up with her own coat. She had a torn bra and suffered a broken nose and cheekbone. Because of the advanced decomposition of her body, it was difficult to determine what other injuries Kalechi may have sustained before her death. However, the official cause was identified as blunt force trauma to the head, likely inflicted with a stick or stone. There were no signs of strangulation, gunshot wounds, or sexual assault, though investigators did not rule out the possibility that the crime had a sexual motive. The meticulous nature of the grave led authorities to suspect that the perpetrator may have had training in military engineering. A specialist from the University of Helsinki analyzed a stick that had been driven through Kalechi's body after death. It was determined to have been cut no earlier than August and had been sharpened using a Finnish knife known as a plukko, likely by someone who was left-handed. Interestingly, there were no pine trees in the immediate area, and although investigators searched for the exact tree the stick came from, it was never found. On October 14th, Kalechi's other shoe turned up. However, it offered no further information. Her watch, red purse, and hymn book, all three of which she was carrying when she went missing, have never been either. Law enforcement was not short of leads in Kalechi's case. One of their prime suspects was a parish priest that remained a suspect for many years. He moved to Marikavia just weeks before the disappearance. The 17-year-old girl had written him a letter in the days prior to her vanishing in regards to some religious issues she was having. Despite this, the priest claimed that he didn't know Kalechi that well. However, this priest had a strong alibi. He had taken part in a party that evening, then spent time in the clergy house. The following morning at 8 a.m., he had a class to attend. In total, the police couldn't account for around 20 minutes of his time, but he also didn't have a car or driver's license. So police felt that he simply couldn't have made it to the crime scene and back and had the time to attack Kalechi. Despite this, many online sleuths consider him a strong suspect even today for several reasons. The priest was later found to have had improper relations during the war and was expelled from his African missionary work due to his relationship with a local nurse. He was known to flirt with young women and in 1955 had a relationship with an underage girl. He was later prosecuted for raping her and for getting engaged while being married to someone else. There are also rumors that he was either harassing or sexually abusing Kalechi, but these whisperings appeared to be unsubstantiated. The priest was mentioned in Kalechi's diary, but it's not publicly known what she said about him. It's noted that one of his relatives had a car that looked similar to the one connected with the case. A local man whose identity was hidden told the Finnish magazine that he believed the priest was responsible, but that he did not execute Kalechi by his own hand. Instead, he hired someone else to carry out the job. A German immigrant named Hans Assmann was also linked to the case, as well as being suspected of being involved in other murder cases. According to his wife, he and his driver were near the location at the time of the disappearance. He owned a light brown car similar but not the same as the one seen by eyewitnesses at the time. In 1997, he allegedly confessed on his deathbed to a former police officer claiming that he and his driver had accidentally hit Kalechi on the night of May 17th, and to avoid responsibility, they decided to stage the scene to make it look like a homicide. He said that the accident was unavoidable. Assmann's wife added that when he returned home after that night, his shoes were wet, and he was missing one sock. There were also dents in the car. She claimed that a few days later, her husband and driver went out again, but this time they took a shovel with him. Assmann is also known to be left-handed like the perpetrator in Kalechi's case. Another man suspected of being involved in the slaying of Kaliki was a 38-year-old ditch digger who lived in a 1 to 2 kilometer radius of the crime scene. He reportedly suffered several mental illnesses and spent much of his time in and out of mental hospitals. In 1940, the man was found guilty for a sexual offense. The man in question was known to be a peeping Tom, and authorities believed he may have had assistance from his brother-in-law, who had a criminal record. However, the suspect's mother and sister claimed he had been in bed from 7 p.m. that evening after a day of heavy drinking. During police interrogation, the man stated that Kaliki was no longer alive and that her body would never be found, a statement he later retracted, insisting he had been misunderstood. He was questioned twice in connection with the case, with one of those interrogations taking place in a mental hospital. His doctor eventually ordered the police to stop as the man's behavior grew increasingly erratic and disoriented. Following this, the brother-in-law relocated, further raising suspicions. Investigators focused on the pair, especially since they both worked in a field just 50 meters from where Kaliki's body was eventually discovered. A shovel found at the site had been used to dig the grave. In February 2002, investigators confirmed that while there was compelling circumstantial evidence linking the two men to the crime, both had died by 1972 without ever being formally charged. Kaliki's funeral took place on October 25, 1953. It was attended by 25,000 people. Despite the numerous leads and suspects in Kaliki's case, almost 9 decades later, her brutal murder continues to go unsolved. Moving on to the next case. Jessica Renee Johnson. Jessica Renee Johnson was a 37-year-old single mother living with her 2 children and her parents in Horn Lake, Mississippi. Her parents, David and Linda, cherished having their daughter and grandchildren under one roof. Jessica was devoted to her children, a 19-year-old son and an 8-year-old daughter from previous relationships, who meant everything to her. Her family described her as a loving and attentive mother, especially when she was doing well. Jessica had faced challenges with drug addiction in the past, but her loved ones believed she was making real progress toward recovery. That's why they grew concerned when she began a relationship with Garland Hart. Garland had a troubling reputation, known for drug dealing and for mistreating women. Friends and family described the relationship as toxic and believed that Garland was abusive. Jessica herself once chillingly remarked, "This guy is going to kill me." Although most of her loved ones did not approve of the man in her life, Jessica could not bring herself to break up. Friends say they tried to convince her to call it off, but anytime Jessica did get away, she'd go right back. She believed that being with Garland had helped her stay away from her addictions. On May 31, 37, Jessica left her home and told her family that she was going to stay with her boyfriend. The next day, on June 1, 2017, Jessica called her daughter and let her know that she would be home later in the evening than normal. However, Jessica never arrived back home. Jessica's parents became concerned when she did not return home. They tried calling her phone, but she never picked up. On June 2, Jessica's mother Linda received a disturbing phone call from the town coroner. Jessica was found dead, and the police claimed it was a suicide. Linda could not believe what she had just heard. It was found that between 9:30 and 10:30 a.m. on June 2, a mail carrier found Jessica's body. She was on her knees resting against the mailbox. Shoelaces were tied around her neck, which further looped around the mailbox post, which was only a few feet tall. Even though the shoestrings were around her neck, one side was pressed against her cheekbone. Her purse was open on the ground placed between her legs. Police claimed that she had hung her, but committing suicide on something this small has been considered impossible by experts and the public alike. Police also found an unlaced shoe splattered with blood a few steps away from the body. However, it was never forensically tested. Jessica's body was taken for forensic examination, and the coroner found numerous marks on Jessica's hand, along with a footprint that hinted at the victim being beaten before her death. However, the cause of death was determined to be asphyxiation due to ligature strangulation. Due to her history with addiction, some have suggested that the marks on her arms look like the marks some users get when meth splatters. Jessica's body was found outside the home of Garland's friend's house. Jessica would go to this house sometimes when Garland would stay there. The house was less than 5 miles from her parents' home, and according to locals, the house was notorious for its illegal activity. According to the homeowner, Garland's friend, there were several people at his house between June 31st and June 2nd. He claimed that he had not seen Jessica and Garland together for a few months. He stated that the two were acting strange, particularly Jessica claiming that she seemed out of her normal self. At some point, Jessica got into a fight with Garland and wanted to leave but later decided to stay. However, the homeowner does not know why the couple were fighting. Jessica had apparently called a friend. She was hysterical and had locked herself in the bathroom and begged her friend to pick her up. The friend showed up, but Jessica did not leave with them. Garland denied ever being violent towards Jessica. Although it's worth noting, sometime after Jessica's death, Garland was arrested on DV charges filed by a woman he started dating after Jessica's death. According to the homeowner, the night before Jessica's death, she had reportedly been walking around his house holding her shoelaces and making threats to harm herself. He recounted, "One of my roommates and I were told she was out in the driveway, pulled the shoelaces from her shoes and was threatening it. He basically just shrugged it off and told her, 'Get out of here with that. I don't want to hear it,' and then shut the door on her." Later that night, the homeowner claimed Jessica sent him a text message expressing emotional distress, saying she didn't want to feel the pain anymore. He stated that this was the last time he heard from her. To some investigators, this account supported the theory that Jessica may have taken her own life, viewing the message as a final goodbye. However, her family strongly rejected the idea of suicide. They pointed out several inconsistencies. Jessica was not wearing her own clothes when she was found, and she had no makeup on, something entirely out of character for her. Her family insisted that Jessica never left the house without being fully dressed and made up, as it was part of how she maintained her confidence. To them, the scenario surrounding her death felt staged and entirely at odds with who Jessica was. The whole thing looked like a staged crime scene. The family then decided to hire a forensic scientist because they did not believe that Jessica was capable of committing suicide. They hired Dr. Maurice Goodwin to take a look at the case. Although a complete autopsy wasn't conducted on Jessica's remains, a partial one was performed. According to this partial autopsy, traces of methamphetamine and Xanax was detected in Jessica's system at the time of her death. Nonetheless, the quantities found were insufficient to constitute an overdose. The reports also specified Jessica's time of death as approximately 3:30 a.m. on June 2nd. Furthermore, her son recalled receiving a text message from his mother's phone around this time suggesting that she was either alive at the time of her death or that someone else had used her phone to send this message. In the text, she said she would be spending the day with G. G is how she referred to Garland in text. Dr. Goodwin wanted to do an autopsy on Jessica's body, but her body had been cremated along with the clothes. In their grief and confusion, Jessica's parents chose to cremate her because of financial constraints. They also trusted that the police possessed sufficient evidence to conduct an investigation. Dr. Goodwin was of the opinion that Jessica's death was not a suicide and would have warranted a further investigation by the law enforcement. The general consensus is that police horribly mishandled her case, with her family citing the fact that they did not create a crime scene and failed to look for further evidence. There was also a CCTV camera pointing straight at the mailbox, but the police never asked for the footage. One later questioned the homeowner. Garland's friend had several different excuses regarding what happened to the footage. This has led many to believe that they were helping Garland with a cover-up. Police did question Garland and the homeowner, but they were never charged. Police never named Garland as a person of interest in Jessica's death. To make matters worse, Garland reportedly changed the passcode on Jessica's phone before giving it to her family, then refused to share the new code, effectively blocking them from accessing messages, photos, or other potentially crucial information. Messages, photos, or other potentially crucial information. Despite the family's efforts, Apple was also unable to help them unlock the device. Though Jessica had struggled with addiction in the past and was facing difficulties in her relationship, those closest to her firmly rejected the idea that she would take her own life. She was working hard to rebuild her life and, above all, she adored her children, something her loved ones say would have kept her going. Jessica had even warned her mother in the past, saying that if anything ever happened to her, Garland would be involved. She told me, "Mama, if anything happens to me, go find him. You know I'm not going to say his name, but go find him," her mother Linda recalled. To this day, Jessica's case remains open and under investigation. Era Gambarijo. A girl left the gym to walk home, just a few 100 yards away, but she never arrived, triggering an extensive police search. Over time, the case became one of the most infamous in modern Italian history, leaving millions stunned. No one could have predicted that the twists and turns would rival a detective movie, or that such a tragedy could unfold in real life. Yara Gambarijo was born on May 21, 1997, in a small Italian town called Brembate di Sopra. Located near Milan, the town has a population of just over 7,000 and is known for its quiet atmosphere, historic architecture, and scenic beauty. Yara's family had deep roots in the town. She grew up with caring parents, an older sister, and 2 younger brothers. Yara loved her hometown, attended the local school, had many friends, and was passionate about gymnastics. A large sports center stood only a few 100 yards from her home, and she visited it regularly. On November 26, when Yara was 13 years old, she planned to make a quick stop at the gym to return a stereo to her coach. Around 5:15 p.m., she said goodbye to her parents and left, mentioning she'd be back in about an hour. Despite her age, Yara's parents weren't worried about her going out alone. Their town was considered very safe, and the gym was only a few minutes away. However, as the evening went on and Yara didn't return, their concern began to grow. By 7 p.m., Yara still hadn't come home, which was unusual for her. At 7:11 p.m., her mother tried calling her, but the call went straight to voicemail. Alarmed, her parents quickly contacted the police. The case was forwarded to a larger city about 7 miles away, where an experienced detective named Letizia Ruggieri was assigned to lead the investigation. She immediately dispatched officers to begin searching the town and requested assistance from the military police. After speaking with Yara's parents, investigators went to the gym to retrace her final known movements. Yara's coach confirmed that she had arrived around 5:30 p.m. Her friends also reported seeing her, chatting with her, watching her do some exercises, and then leaving to head home. Police also discovered that Yara had sent a text message to a friend at 6:44 p.m. This was the last time anyone heard from her. Based on this timeline, investigators concluded that Yara vanished somewhere between the sports complex and her home during her return trip. The search teams divided into groups, some combing the streets while others interviewed potential witnesses and gathered evidence, including CCTV footage. Several people near the sports center that evening claimed they saw a girl matching Yara's description speaking with 2 men near a red car, but police couldn't confirm whether it was actually her. Despite thoroughly searching the sports center, no trace of Yara was found. Meanwhile, local and military police scoured the surrounding streets, open fields, and the banks of a small river that ran through the town. Firefighters and volunteers also joined the search effort, but there was still no sign of Yara. Detective Letizia then called in canine units to assist. The search dogs picked up Yara's scent from her personal belongings. But instead of leading the police from the sports center toward her home, the dogs followed a trail in the opposite direction, toward a small town called Mapello. Letizia also requested Yara's cell phone location data, which revealed that her phone had connected to a tower in Mapello at 6:49 p.m., just 5 minutes after she had texted her friend. Given the distance between the sports center and Mapello, investigators believed it was that she had been transported by vehicle. At this point, Yara's trail went cold, leaving the police with 2 main theories. The most likely was that she had been kidnapped. The was that she had run away, but this seemed doubtful. In her final message, Yara had made plans to meet a friend the following day, making it hard to believe she would suddenly choose to disappear. Despite their doubts, investigators interviewed all of Yara's relatives in France, but found no evidence of problems at home. Taking an aggressive approach, Letizia ordered wiretaps on the phones of Yara's family members and several dozen other individuals. She also made a bold decision to request cell phone location data for every device active in Mapello on the evening of Yara's disappearance. If this was a kidnapping, the perpetrator's phone would likely have connected to local towers, though identifying them among the crowd would be an enormous challenge. In total, the police obtained data from 15,000 phones present in the area that evening. A special team was formed to investigate these numbers, focusing on those deemed suspicious for various reasons. Meanwhile, the physical search for Yara continued, but as days passed, there were no breakthroughs. Letizia grew concerned that their efforts would lead nowhere, pinning her hopes on the phone records, believing one of them had to belong to the kidnapper. Over the next few days, the police monitored thousands of hours of conversations, but none seemed connected to Yara's case. This tedious process dragged on until late November, when an officer suddenly overheard a chilling and highly suspicious phrase. During one phone call, a man was heard saying, "Forgive me, Lord, I didn't kill her." Investigators swiftly identified the caller as Mohammed Fikri, a Moroccan construction worker who lived in the same town where Yara's phone signal had last been traced. When police tried to locate him, they encountered a major obstacle. The team monitoring the calls was working with a delay of several days due to the overwhelming volume of recordings. By the time authorities listened to Fikri's conversation, 3 days had passed, and he was already aboard a ship bound for Morocco. Given the suspicious circumstances, Italian officials acted quickly and intercepted the vessel. Fikr was arrested and brought back to Italy for questioning. Meanwhile, investigators found an alarming piece of evidence: his car. Upon inspection, they discovered a mattress in the trunk, stained with what appeared to be blood. The mattress was immediately sent to the lab, but here the police faced an unexpected twist. The blood didn't belong to Yara and apparently wasn't even human. Upon further analysis of cell phone recording, it was revealed that Fikr had said something completely different in his native language, and the officer had mistranslated the part of the phrase. After conducting additional checks, investigators confirmed that Fikr had nothing to do with Yara's disappearance, and they had to release him. By that time, Yara's case had become one of the most well-known topics across Italy, with extensive coverage in the national media. Millions of people followed the search efforts, hoping she would be found alive. When news of Fitri's arrest hit the papers, many were convinced that the kidnapper had finally been caught. So the news of his innocence came as a shock and disappointment. It meant the investigators were back to square one with no other leads to help them find Yara. The police continued to monitor phone conversations, search for other evidence, and do everything they could, but nothing seemed to lead anywhere. This continued for exactly 3 months until February 26, 2011. On that day, a man from a small town 6 miles from Yara's home went to one of the many nearby fields to fly his remote-controlled airplane. But the airplane had some issues, and he had to land it in a spot with tall, thick grass to prevent it from crashing into the ground. When he went to retrieve it, he noticed a pile of rags. And he didn't think much of it, but then he saw boots sticking out from under the pile and decided to call the police. Officers found the human body under the rags, but the level of decomposition made it almost impossible to visually identify the victim. However, when Letitia arrived at the scene, she immediately knew it was Yara. She was wearing the same clothes she had on when she went to the sports complex 3 months earlier. Near the body, they also found her iPad, house keys, SIM card, and the removable battery from her cell phone, but the phone itself was nowhere to be found. Italy's most renowned forensic pathologist was brought in to examine the remains and concluded that the cause of death was multiple stab wounds. She also found no signs of assault, but the fact that some of her clothing was removed led investigators to suggest that this was the motive. Experts also found fibers on the body that were commonly used in a specific type of fabric. This suggested that the killer might work in a related manufacturing facility somewhere in the area. Additionally, they found 2 foreign DNA samples, one on the victim's gloves and another on the battery of her smartphone. However, there were several issues. The samples were quite small, making it difficult to extract a full profile. There were also no matches in the various databases, so the investigators found themselves at another dead end. But 2 months later, Letizia received an unexpected call. Experts from the lab reported that, upon further investigation of the victim's belongings, they had discovered biological material on her underwear, and the analysis yielded a full DNA profile of an unknown man. With the killer's DNA in hand, Letizia divided the officers into different teams and assigned them specific tasks. Some were responsible for collecting DNA samples from all of Yara's relatives, acquaintances, and everyone at the sports complex. Others focused on analyzing cell phone location data, compiling a list of numbers belonging to people who traveled from Yara's town to Mapello that evening, and then collecting their DNA samples. Given the scale of these tasks, she had to wait weeks for results, which were slow in coming. Even with 3 laboratories across Italy working on the DNA samples, the process could take years. In the following months, the police collected thousands of DNA samples, but none matched the killer's profile. Meanwhile, Letizia kept thinking how to get new leads, and soon she had an idea. Not far from the field where Yara's body was found, there was a nightclub. Letizia knew that killers often leave their victims' bodies in familiar areas, and this club had a reputation for being a hot spot for people with criminal records and other shady individuals. So she decided to try this theory and collect DNA samples from all the visitors of that nightclub. Letizia assigned several officers to stand guard at the nightclub on Fridays and Saturdays, collecting DNA samples from everyone entering. Since all club-goers had membership cards, investigators could access information on everyone who had visited the club in the past. Although Letizia knew the chances of success were slim, she wanted to try everything in her power due to the lack of other leads. And soon, she received a call from the lab. DNA from one of the visitors matched the killer's profile. The man's name was Damiano, but there was a problem. The match was only partial, and Damiano was quickly cleared as a suspect since he was on another continent at the time of Yara's disappearance. But still, this was a significant breakthrough. Experts assumed that since his DNA only partially matched the killer's profile, Damiano must be related to the actual perpetrator. Letizia and her team began investigating Damiano's family to identify the most likely suspect. Since this was before genetic genealogy became common in criminal investigations, this method was new and extremely challenging. They soon made a surprising discovery. Damiano's mother had worked as a housekeeper for Yara's family for 10 years, but left the job a few years ago. When she found out that someone from her family might be the killer, the woman was deeply shocked. Despite this revelation, the search for the suspect dragged on for many months. Letizia eventually concluded that none of Damiano's immediate relatives were Yara's murderer, which meant they would need to investigate hundreds, if not thousands, of distant relatives. As months passed without progress, the media began accusing Letizia and her team of incompetence and reluctance to work on the case. Several politicians joined in, trying to have the detective removed, but they were unsuccessful. Despite the heavy pressure, Letizia continued to do everything in her power to identify the killer. She and her team examined various family trees and archival records dating back to 1716. They had to review of individuals repeatedly hitting dead ends. This continued until September 2011, when investigators finally made a breakthrough. One family tree led them to a man named Giuseppe, who was already deceased. However, his widow had preserved some postmarks with his saliva, and experts managed to extract a DNA profile. The results showed that Giuseppe was very likely the father or grandfather of the killer whose DNA was found on the victim's underwear. Giuseppe had 2 sons, and investigators obtained their DNA samples, but they faced another unexpected disappointment. Although the results showed a close match, either of the sons was the killer. This left Letizia stumped. The killer had to be closely related to this family, but none of the male members showed a complete match. The only remaining possibility was that Giuseppe might have had a child with another woman, a child his family knew nothing about. Detectives focused on this lead, but uncovering such sensitive information proved extremely difficult. They interviewed thousands of people who might have known or seen Giuseppe during his lifetime. Nearly a year later, they got an intriguing clue. Since the 1960s, Giuseppe had been visiting a spa complex in a small town near Milan without his wife. He stayed there for 2 weeks every May and never brought his family along. Letizia requested records of all visitors to the spa complex during those years. To her surprise, these documents were still available, and investigators began examining them. They compiled a list of all the women who stayed at the spa during the same time as Giuseppe. This process stretched over a year. But Letizia still couldn't get any closer to identifying Giuseppe's possible lover. Meanwhile, the media caught wind of what they were doing, and the theory about a secret child sparked widespread across Italy. Journalists, eager to capitalize on this attention, began their own searches for children born from extramarital affairs. To their surprise, they uncovered many such stories. In one small village, for example, they found 5 such children. This continued until February 2014, when investigators finally made some progress. With the widespread attention on the case and the search for Giuseppe's possible lover, the police received numerous tips, but all of them led to dead ends. But in the summer of that year, they received a tip suggesting that Giuseppe might have had an affair with a woman named Esther Artsify. Reviewing their records, investigators suddenly discovered that they had already collected a DNA sample from Esther 2 years earlier. However, the results showed she was not related to the killer. Still, Letizia decided to request a new analysis, and the results were shocking. It turned out that the initial expert had mistakenly compared the killer's DNA with Yara's DNA instead. Expert had mistakenly compared the killer's DNA with Yara's DNA instead of Esther's. When a different expert re-examined the correct samples, they found that Esther was indeed the killer's mother. With the long-awaited confirmation in hand, Letizia discovered that Esther had 3 children, including twins, a boy and a girl, who fit the aged profile. Although the twins were considered the children of Esther's legal husband, investigators suspected that in reality, Giuseppe was the biological father. Since the killer was clearly male, they focused on Esther's son. At the time of the investigation, he was 42 years old, worked as a construction worker, and lived with his wife and children in Marpello, the same town where Yara's cell phone signal had disappeared. Letizia quickly came up with a plan to obtain his DNA sample without spooking him. She learned that he used a specific road every day and arranged a sobriety checkpoint there. The man, unaware of the real reason, blew into the breathalyzer, which was immediately sent to the lab with his saliva. Almost 4 years after the murder, Letizia finally received long-awaited confirmation. His DNA fully matched the biological sample found on Yara's underwear. This man's name was Massimo Bassetti, and on June 16th, he was finally arrested. Bassetti denied any involvement in the crime and claimed he was innocent, so the case went to trial. During the preparations, investigators uncovered several alarming facts that indirectly implicated Bassetti. His browser history showed searches of an unaccepted nature related to minors. On the evening of Yara's disappearance, his cell phone was located in her town but was turned off at 5:45 p.m. and not turned on again until the next morning. Bassetti's car was captured on surveillance footage near the sports center on the same evening, just minutes before Yara vanished. The car had no license plates, making it difficult to identify the driver before Bassetti's arrest. Now, it was confirmed to be Bassetti's vehicle. Interestingly, fibers from his car seats matched the fibers found on the victim's body. The prosecution also called a witness who lived in Yara's town. The woman testified that on the evening of the disappearance, she had gone outside to take out the trash when she saw a car speeding by her house. According to her description, the vehicle resembled Bassetti's car, and she saw a child inside. She added that she heard screams coming from the car. Police also discovered that Bassetti frequently stopped at a pizza restaurant on the same street as Yara's home. This suggested that he might have seen her long before the abduction and possibly had been planning the crime in advance. Regarding the surveillance footage, Bassetti claimed he was simply driving home from work that evening, but investigators found that he did not work that day, which was confirmed by his colleagues' testimonies, CCTV footage, and cell phone location data. The trial began in the summer of 2015, a year after Bassetti's arrest, and it quickly captured the attention of millions across Italy. While most people were sure that Bassetti was the killer, no one could have anticipated the twists this trial would reveal. The prosecution's version was clear. Bassetti had likely been watching Yara for days or even weeks before deciding to abduct her after she left the complex alone. He then took her to the field where her body was later discovered and killed her. The main theory was that Bassetti had intended to assault her, but for some reason, he didn't go through with it. Bassetti's wife testified that he was home with the family having dinner at the time Yara went missing, But this was contradicted by CCTV footage near the sports complex and 3 witnesses who saw Bassetti's car at the time he claimed to be at home. The defense argued that their client was innocent. Bassetti himself claimed he often had nosebleeds, which could have gotten on his clothes and tools. His lawyer suggested that the real killer might have somehow come into contact with Bassetti's blood before the crime, which then ended up on the victim's underwear. The defense also challenged the DNA evidence, claiming that a mistake might have been made. They explained that there are 2 types of DNA, one that changes significantly between relatives and another one that changes very slowly over generations. The DNA found on the victim's underwear was of the slower changing type, so the defense argued that it could belong to anyone related to Bassetti, whether close or distant. But the prosecution's experts countered this, insisting that Bassetti's DNA matched the evidence beyond any doubt. But that wasn't the defense's main argument. During the trial, they dropped a bombshell that caused a huge stir. They named a new suspect, a gym instructor named Sylvia. It turned out that after the body was discovered, experts found Sylvia's blood on the sleeve of Ira's jacket. Sylvia's father revealed that when she came home after Ira's disappearance, she had been crying all night. Investigators also discovered that Sylvia had sent a few messages to her brother on that evening, but both of them deleted it shortly after, so the content of the messages remained unknown. Sylvia herself claimed she couldn't remember why she acted that way, what she had written to her brother, or how her blood ended up on Ira's clothing. In court, she repeatedly refused to answer questions, only responding with, "I don't know." Despite the absence of a clear explanation for these unexpected revelations, the evidence against Bassetti was deemed sufficient to convict him. In the February, he was sentenced to life in prison, and his legal team failed to overturn the verdict. Interestingly, the day after his conviction, Bassetti's wife visited him in prison and revealed a shocking truth. None of their 3 children were biologically his. She confessed to being unfaithful with multiple men. Additionally, it was later revealed that Esther's child was fathered by neither her legal husband nor Giuseppe, but by yet another man. Since his sentencing, Bassetti has remained behind bars, but the unusual details of Sylvia's blood continue to raise questions among those following the case. Some skeptics believe the DNA evidence may have been manipulated, suggesting Bassetti could have been wrongfully convicted. However, given that the evidence was thoroughly analyzed by Italy's leading forensic experts, the chances of his innocence are considered highly unlikely. What do you think about this case? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Moving on to the next case. Halloween murder of Lisa and French. A Halloween evening in October 1973 that should have been filled with fun turned into a horrific nightmare for the small town of Fond du Lac, Wisconsin. A trusted neighbor and family friend committed an unimaginable crime against a 9-year-old girl who was excitedly trick-or-treating alone in her hobo costume. Lisa Ann French was born on June 2, 1964 in Oshkosh, Wisconsin to Alan French and Marion Gehrig. She lived in Fond du Lac with her mother, stepfather Bruce DePau, and her newborn half-brother. Lisa was a lively and bright 9-year-old, attending Chegwin Elementary School as a grader. She was also a proud member of the Girl Scouts, which reflected her active involvement in her community and her friendly, outgoing personality. On the evening of October 31, 1973, Halloween night, Lisa was thrilled with excitement and dressed in her carefully crafted costume. She set out to visit homes in her neighborhood, wearing a black felt hat, a green parka, jeans with blue masking tape, and freckles drawn on her cheeks. She had planned to attend an outdoor Halloween party at Pumpkin Place on East Bank Street with her friend and Parker. Unfortunately, Ann had been grounded and couldn't join Lisa, leaving the 9-year-old to trick or treat on her own. Undeterred, Lisa ventured into her familiar neighborhood, unaware of the danger that awaited her. Her Halloween night began as expected, and she visited several homes in the area, including those of a classmate and her teacher. Meanwhile, at home, Lisa's mother grew more anxious as her daughter failed to return by her 7 p.m. curfew. By 10 p.m., with no sign of Lisa, Marianne's worry deepened, and she realized something was terribly wrong. Family, friends, and neighbors quickly joined forces to form a search party, combing the neighborhood and nearby areas for any trace of the young girl. The entire town of Fond-du-Lac rallied together in the effort, shocked that someone could disappear while simply out trick-or-treating. As the hours passed, hope faded into fear, and the search for Lisa became more urgent, with everyone dreading the worst outcome. Her family could not have known that just miles away, Lisa's body lay abandoned in a field, discarded by someone they once trusted. A massive 4-day search was launched after Lisa's disappearance, involving over 5,000 volunteers, 700 block parents, police officers, the National Guard, and her fellow Girl Scouts. The search ended tragically on November 3rd, when farmer Gerald Braun discovered 2 brown plastic bags behind a barbed wire fence near a forest in Takeda, Wisconsin. One bag contained Lisa's naked body, the other her Halloween costume. The community's worst fears were confirmed, and the investigation shifted to finding her perpetrator. An autopsy revealed that Lisa lost her life from asphyxiation, with additional trauma indicating she suffered severe abuse. 3 days later, on November 6th, Lisa's funeral was held at Emmanuel Trinity Lutheran Church. A somber service attended by many from the heartbroken community. The Fond-du-Lac Chamber of Commerce soon posted a $10,000 reward for information leading to her perpetrator's capture. Gerald Turner quickly became a suspect due to his proximity to Lisa and her family. But it took nearly 9 months of questioning and forensic testing before he confessed on August 8, 1974. Despite an inconclusive polygraph test and his refusal to take another, forensic evidence linked him to the crime. Hair and fiber samples from his home matched those found on Lisa's body and clothes. At the time, in October 1973, Turner lived with his girlfriend, Arlene Penn, and their infant child. Lisa, who was familiar with Turner and his family, would often spend time with their infant, forming a bond with the child. She also had regular conversations with Turner, who had been a neighbor for some time. Prior to this, Turner had shared a rented side of a duplex with Lisa's family, further strengthening the connection between the two households. This proximity and familiarity seemed to make Turner a trusted figure in Lisa's young life. Despite the seemingly normal relationship between Turner and Lisa's family, Turner had a dark past that was largely unknown at the time. Though he had not been convicted of any major offenses, there was an alarming incident in his history. Turner had previously been involved in an offense with a 15-year-old babysitter, though he had never been formally accused or charged for this incident. His past remained hidden from those around him, including Lisa's family, who trusted him as a neighbor and friend. During his confession, the details of what happened that fateful night was revealed. As Lisa made her rounds, she eventually arrived at the house of Gerald Turner. She innocently rang his doorbell, greeted him with the familiar trick-or-treat phrase, and stepped inside with her candy bag held open, expecting a handful of sweets. Once inside, Turner began casually talking with Lisa about candy. Under the guise of friendliness, Turner lured the unsuspecting child further into his home, ultimately leading her into his bedroom. There, Turner's true intentions became horrifyingly clear. He assaulted Lisa, violating the trust that had existed between him and her family. The brutal attack ended with Lisa's demise, as she stopped breathing during the assault. Panic set in for Turner as he realized what he had done, and he tried unsuccessfully to revive her. The situation took a further twist when Turner's girlfriend, Arlene, unexpectedly arrived home. She had been attending the very Halloween party that Lisa was supposed to go to. When she arrived, Turner was dressed in a bathrobe and repeatedly claimed that he was feeling sick. His demeanor and the bathrobe may have seemed odd to her, but she had no reason to suspect anything sinister. As she went about her evening, Turner made multiple trips to the bedroom, each time claiming he needed to lie down. Little did Arlene know that, at that very moment, Lisa's body was hidden in the bathroom adjacent to the bedroom. A dark secret Turner was desperate to keep hidden. After Arlene left the residence around 8 p.m. to visit her mother, Turner set into motion a chilling plan to conceal his horrific crime. In a state of panic, he stuffed Lisa's lifeless body and her clothes into separate bags, carefully preparing to dispose of any trace of her existence. Turner, desperate to avoid leaving fingerprints on her body or at the crime scene, went to extreme lengths, wearing socks on his hands as he handled Lisa's remains. He meticulously wiped down her shoes and the zipper of her parka in an attempt to erase any evidence that might tie him to the crime. Turner then loaded Lisa's body into his vehicle and drove to a remote location in Ticata, Wisconsin, a small rural area far from his home. Under the cover of darkness, he discarded her body in a farm field off McCabe Road, hoping the isolated location would prevent anyone from discovering her remains. It was a calculated attempt to conceal the horrific actions he had committed. Despite his efforts to cover up the crime, Turner could not prevent the truth from eventually coming to light. He was arrested on August 9, 1974, and stood trial the following year. On February 4, 1975, he was found guilty of degree murder, enticing a child for immoral purposes and perversion, receiving a sentence of 38 years and 6 months in prison. Over time, Turner made several attempts to secure his release. However, on February 23, 2022, Judge Paul Zizany rejected his request for release and ruled that Turner would remain confined to a high-security mental health facility. Nicky Verstappen. The time for summer camp was drawing near, and Nicky Verstappen wasn't sure he wanted to go or not. He didn't travel the previous year because he was afraid of being homesick, and his parents were in favor of him staying at home. Summer times were spent at home in the southern Dutch town of Hebelioem by Nicky Verstappen's preference. In this manner, he could go see friends whenever he wanted, play games with Finn, his younger sister Kay, or cuddle and show his dog lots of love. Every time he left the house for summer camp, he would always miss his dog. Nicky Verstappen felt compelled to attend summer camp in 1998, despite his reservations about the idea. He sensed that he was no longer 10 years old. At 11 years old, he was maturing. He told his mother that he wasn't sure about summer camp, and she reassured him, telling him he would have a great time there. With his best friend attending as well, Nicky thought everything would work out. Nicky Verstappen finished packing his essentials after deciding to go, making sure to include his go-to red and white pajamas, official apparel from Fathikajak, his beloved Amsterdam soccer team. Given his fondness for all things related to Ajax emblem and colors, it was given to him as a Christmas present. Actually, from red to white, Nicky Verstappen's room was primarily decorated with Ajax elements. On the first day of summer camp, Nicky packed his things, took one last glance at his room, and headed out. Sadly, he would never again be able to view the poster of Jerry Litmanen that had been up against his room's wall. On March 13, 1987, Nicky Verstappen was born in Hebelheim, a district in Limburg, the Netherlands, to Peter and Bertie Verstappen. He was the oldest of 2 children and came from a loving home. Nicky enjoyed playing with Fimke, his younger sister. Living in a tiny town of 800, Nicky would regularly ride his bike around his hometown of Heilbronn. This helped him become well known. He was regarded as a laid-back young man who was nice. He was also seen as a content and mature young man. His mother called him sporty and impulsive. It was difficult to think about Nicky Verstappen at the time without thinking of the Amsterdam football squad. Nicky was an ardent Ajax supporter who never missed a game. It was reported that Nicky was a skilled football player and that he had played the game himself. When the time came for the 8 to 12-year-olds' annual summer camp, Nicky Verstappen and 36 other students from his school boarded a bus and traveled to Brunsum, 45 minutes away from Hebelheim, to attend the children's summer camp that was being held on the Dehicorp camping grounds on the Brunsummerheide. Every child in Heilbronn was known to have the opportunity to attend this summer camp each year. Nicky Verstappen was a little let down when his best friend abruptly withdrew and made the decision to stay home, even though he had encouraged him to go. But Nicky made the decision to continue attending the summer program. He said goodbye to his pal and remained on the bus. When the kids arrived at the Dehicorp camping area, they were split up into their different tent groups. 10 tents were assigned to each of the 37 children, and the 12 camp leaders shared the 4 tents that remained. It was customary for each group at camp to give its tent a name. Their team was likewise called by the same name. Nicky Verstappen called his tent Nitriders, and he shared it with 4 other lads his age who were his buddies. The first day of summer camp was full of games and team-building exercises. just as his mother had promised. They all gathered around a campfire later that evening, when one of the leaders told spooky ghost stories. The camp leaders ate and drank until midnight, while the children were ordered to bed at around 10 o'clock. Summer camp got off to a wonderful start. Everyone went to bed in their tents for the night, excited for what was sure to be an amazing day filled with lots of fun activities scheduled for the next day. August 10, 1998, at around 5 in the morning. A tent mate of Nicky Verstappen awoke to use the loo. Nicky and the other tent mates were still asleep at that point. Another youngster from the Night Riders tent woke up at around 6 in the morning and discovered Nicky Verstappen was gone. Their first assumption was that he had used the loo. But when the trumpet for breakfast was blown 2 hours later at 8 in the morning, and Nicky was still nowhere to be seen, his other campers started to worry. Then, they reported to their camp authorities that Nicky had left their tent since 6 a.m. and had not come back. Searches for Nicky Verstappen spread across the campsite involving both camp officials and campers. They yelled out his name and looked everywhere for him, but he was nowhere to be seen. The leaders believed that Nicky Verstappen had run away because he had expressed doubt about attending summer camp. At that point, he called his parents in Hebloem to inform them that he had vanished from the campsite and that they were unable to find him. Nicky's parents were shocked to learn this. Bertie Verstappen, his mother, realized something wasn't quite right. She is aware that her son was anxious about leaving the house in the first place, and that he would never choose to leave the camp without telling anyone. That he would venture out on his own was absurd. In order to find their kid, Bertie and Peter hurriedly departed Hyberlum and made their way to the campsite. Nicky's shoes were still in the tent when Bertie arrived at the campsite. She received the impression that he would have worn his shoes if he had intended to flee. Nicky's parents then accompanied the camp leaders in their frantic search for their son, screaming out his name all throughout the campsite, but sadly, they got no response. By noon, they decided to give the cops a call. By later afternoon, the search party had expanded considerably. A large number of volunteers showed there, most of whom being friends and family from Hebloem and the nearby town of Brunson. They alternated between waiting at Nicky's tent and exploring the nearby fields and bushes to see whether Nicky was there. The search team searched desperately for Nicky. The police conducted extensive questioning of all the camp leaders and visited all the nearby residences to inquire if any inhabitants had maybe seen an 11-year-old boy, but they were unable to obtain any information. Despite the search party's lack of urgency, Nicky's family felt that something was badly wrong. All they could gather was that Nicky Verstappen had wandered off alone from the tent and lost his way through the forest. They expected him to be discovered alive and well and thought he was all right. It seemed that the search day was among the hottest of the entire 1998 summer. The 95-degree weather added to the exhaustion of the quest. While some camp counselors kept the children busy with activities, others took turns searching for Nicky. The children were ordered back to their tents as if nothing had happened, and in the evening, the military was called in to assist with the search. The searchers and military vehicles were calling Nicky's name wildly into the night as they slept. The camp leaders decided that if Nicky was still missing by Tuesday morning, there was no longer a need to camp if one of them went missing. They then made the decision to call off the camp. All the children were loaded onto a bus and sent back to Highball Lim, while search group continued to look farther. It became increasingly evident that Nicky Verstappen did not flee as they continued their search for him. Along with employing their canines, the police also deployed a plane to conduct an aerial search of the encampment. Nicky was nowhere to be found, and by dusk, the search group was running out of daylight. At last, on Tuesday, August 11, 1998, at approximately 9 o'clock at night, Nicky Verstappen's uncle, who was accompanying the search group, saw something lying behind a little pine tree. As he approached, he noticed 11-year-old Nicky Verstappen's lifeless body. Less than a mile from the campsite on the Schinwald Weg in Landgraf, Nicky was discovered in a pine wood. He was nude from the waist up, dressed in his red Ajax pajama trousers and blue knickers. He had taken his Christmas present from the previous year, a pair of pajamas trousers, and flipped them inside out, front to back. Although Nicky suffered a head wound, it did not initially appear to be severe enough to have contributed to his demise. Nicky had clean feet, even though he was discovered near farms and shrubs in a pine grove. It appeared that he did not stroll to the location where he was discovered. Many thought he had been killed someplace else and that his body had been transported to the location where he was discovered. Nicky Verstappen was discovered close to a parking area that was well known for being a meeting place for gay males to have covert sex. Apart from that, there was not much room to move. Nicky Verstappen's body was removed from the campsite around midnight and sent to a mortuary in Mastiac, which was roughly 30 minutes distant. The residents of High Bloem united to help Nicky's family set together a memorial service. 1 week after Johnny left for summer camp on Saturday, August 15, 1998, there was a memorial service at High Bloem sports fields. Given how well-known Nicky was in High Bloem, 600 people showed out for his burial. At his funeral, his affection for Ajax was acknowledged. The red Ajax flag was draped over his coffin, something he would have cherished. His family was devastated and in a state of shock. They would never be the same. Nicky's parents felt bad about pushing their kid to attend summer camp, even though he had told them he didn't know what to expect from the trip. Nicky versus Steven's killer? His family desired clarification and satisfaction. It was clear that someone had to be held responsible for the deaths of their brother and son, but the police had no leads at all. Upon realizing that Nicky was not likely to have left with an unknown person, the police conducted additional interviews with the camp leaders. Sadly, nothing was found that could shed light on the matter. Nicky was examined post-mortem 3 days after he passed away. Nicky's family was forced to wait 2 months for the autopsy results because he was killed during the summer during the holidays. Nicky Verstappen was drugged, and the post-mortem report claims that his body had evidence of sexual abuse. The medical examiner, however, was unable to ascertain the cause of death. As a result, a second autopsy was performed, and the findings were consistent with the first. Nicky may or may not have been sexually assaulted, but the cause of his death was unknown. There was insufficient evidence to conclusively prove that suffocation was the cause of his death, despite the suggestion that it was. After Nicky was killed, a thorough investigation was conducted, but the case went cold and would not be solved for 20 years. The proof that the police have to be used, a tissue with semen and a cigarette button and beer bottle cap were found at the parking lot, around 100 yards from where Nicky Verstappen was discovered. After that, the forensics put together a DNA profile of someone who wasn't Nicky. Though since individuals frequently met in the parking lot and had sex in the woods, it was not database in 1997, the same year that Nicky Verstappen was killed. DNA testing was the latest forensic technology at the time, and there were some limitations on the tests. Furthermore, the prosecutor and not the police might be in charge of any DNA testing that was done on the database. The police at the time lacked both their own database and direct access to the national database without the prosecutor's permission. This makes it more difficult and time-consuming to find a killer immediately. For the purpose of investigating Nicky Verstappen's murder, 40 men's DNA samples were collected. Among the guys were camp leaders, a few men from a nearby campsite, and other men who were visiting the region when Nicky passed away. But none of the DNA matched the profile identified in the crime scene tissue. The detectives were unable to rule out semen, even in the event that the tissue they had recovered was likely a remnant of a sexual encounter unrelated to Nicky's death. A single hair that matched Nicky's color was discovered camp commanders, which gave investigators optimism later on in the inquiry. However, it was found that the hair sample did not belong to Nicky after it was sent to the UK for DNA testing. The autopsy results were released right away. The first person of note was 80-year-old Just Barton, who founded the camp where Nicky and his classmates attended. Nicky's former school principal in High Bloem was Just Barton. Following his conviction for child sexual abuse in the 1950s, he lost his employment. He had also admitted during questioning that he had been close to Nicky Verstappen's tent on the morning of his disappearance, at 6 in the morning. He didn't go there for Nicky, though. He claimed that Juice Barton's alibi was that he cleaned his tent at 5 in the morning and went to see after the youngster who had burned his hand. He then made his way back to Hebloem to attend a friend's burial who had passed away. He returned immediately to the camp after claiming to have learnt about Nicky Verstappen's disappearance during the funeral. Due to his peculiar behavior during the pursuit of Nicky Verstappen, Joe Barton was under police scrutiny for a while. He continued to focus the search towards the location of Nikki's body. He further disclosed that men frequently get together for sex in the parking lot close to the crime scene. The police were uneasy with Joe Barton. They made the decision to investigate his past. Despite being a well-liked part of his community, he had been found guilty of child sexual assault and spent 3 months in jail before being released and permitted to work with children once more. Years later, pictures of him with young boys in his pants or without shirts were found, but at the time, there was no evidence that he had abused any more male children. But following Verstappen's passing, a 15-year-old girl came forward, claiming she had solid evidence that Jules Barton had abused her sexually during summer camp in 1998. One evening, she claimed to be sick, and Jules Barton had given her medication, which later turned out to be adult sleeping pills. She claimed that her garments were disorganized and not what they had been when she went to bed when she woke up. The girl also reported feeling uncomfortable and had pain in her lower abdomen. However, because she had not reported the incident to the police before, they were unable to take any action over her confession. Despite extensive questioning, Joe Barton was not able to be taken into custody because there was insufficient proof linking him to Nikki Verstappen's abduction and death. A 250,000 guilder prize was put up for any lead that would lead to the suspect's investigation into their son's murder. They turned to Peter de Vries, a well-known television crime reporter at the time, and requested him to assist them in unraveling the mystery surrounding the death of their son. Peter de Vries consented to assist them with their investigation. His intervention in the case proved to be Nikki's family's savior over time. On behalf of the Verstappen family, Peter de Vries started a campaign, and unidentified businessmen upped the reward money to 500,000 guilders. The first in-depth national documentary about Nikki's murder case aired in April 1999. The documentary discussed Joe Barton's previous history of sexually abusing children. It raised issues like why, as a convicted sex offender, he was still permitted to deal with children. The police appeared under pressure from the program to look into Joe Barton more thoroughly. This caused discord in Hippoim's small community. The case of Nikki posed a danger to the community's togetherness. Some favored Nikki's family's pursuit of the truth, even if it meant posing difficult questions, while others wished to shield the camp's creator. The bulk of high-blown residents eventually made the decision to avoid Nikki's family. The Verstappens, in their opinion, were on a witch hunt. Only a few devoted friends remained in Nikki's family, and they helped them through the legal proceedings. Nikki Verstappen's case was declared unresolved in July 1999. Bertie and Peter Verstappen had the chance to meet with Queen Beatrix, the former monarch of the Netherlands, in August of the following year. They gave her a letter with an official grievance on the inadequate inquiry into their son's death. As a result, the Maastricht prosecutor later increased attempts to resolve the case. At the location where Nikki's body was discovered in February 2001, the town of Brunson and Nikki's grandparents quietly erected a monument in honor of him. Nikki's parents were not comforted by this. As soon as he woke up every morning, his mother Bertie would light a candle in their house. She spent 20 years doing this. She said, "I wake up at night and hear his voice. In an interview with Peter de Vries, he gives me a call. I get up and head to where Nikki might be, but he's not there anymore." Their once whole and content family of 4 had collapsed into an unhappy, fragmented, and fractured family of 3. Unabated, Bertie had vowed on national television to bring her child's killer to justice for as long as she lived, even if at the time she was not receiving any answers. Bertie and Peter Verstappen asked for assistance in their son's case in a public letter to the Minister of Justice in February 2001. They have no solutions, but they say they are powerless over the legal and police establishments. Subsequently, the legal system took action since it seemed that the residents of Heidelbaum had completely lost faith in one another. The public was growing increasingly dissatisfied with the legal and police systems for failing to provide an explanation for Nikki Verstappen's death. The case was reopened that year, and it was entrusted to a task force seeking a second view to look into from the beginning. The investigative team was able to pinpoint Nikki's death time on June 29, 2001. It was speculated that he passed sometime between 2 p.m. and 9 a.m. on August 10 or August 11. It indicates that before he was killed, Nicky Verstappen was alive for at least 8 hours. Furthermore, the use of new DNA technology revealed the presence of tiny blood droplets on Nicky's pajamas. After testing one of the drips for foreign DNA, it was discovered to be Nicky's. Subsequent inquiry turned out numerous errors committed by the initial team of investigators, which caused the case to be cold for a while. One of the errors made by these detectives was concentrating on the location where Nicky was discovered. Ignoring the fact that Nicky's clean feet indicated he did not walk there on his own, they used that location as the crime site. He was removed from the primary crime scene and disposed of where he had been discovered. Nicky was discovered in a pine tree, and no further evidence was sought during the initial investigation. Not even the campsite where Nicky was last seen was given due consideration as a potential source of information that could identify the murderer. Just Barton was not the only suspect in the crime, as the investigation reveals. Nicky and his buddies appear to have been camping in 1998 when another group from Roldock Seminary set up tents nearby. The cops were interested in a man named Roldock's cook because he had previously made inappropriate contact with a youngster. They thought he was someone who would carry it out once more. Rold Chef wasn't at the campsite the morning that Nicky Verstappen vanished. He didn't seem to have an explanation for his location at the time when questioned. But he passed away in 1999 before the authorities had sufficient proof to make an arrest. There was also another person of interest at the time, a man simply known as VYM. VYM was a local town's sexual offender. On August 10, 1998, he was seen by several witnesses driving a dark-colored car close to the Highcop campsite. In the years February 2001, 2003, 2006, and February 2007, he was questioned by the police whenever a witness came forward and implicated him. Sadly, there was insufficient proof to link him to the crime, and he passed away in 2007 at the age of 64. Vim had maintained till his passing that he had never killed Verstappen. In this case, the police could not afford to ignore the German serial killer Martini. Between 1992 and February 2001, he had sexually abused at least 40 minors and killed 3 boys. Because of his penchant for donning eerie black masks and black attire, Martinet was also referred to as the Masked Man or the Black Man. He typically hunted his victims at children's homes or at campgrounds. Ney was seen as a major suspect as the Highcop campsite was near the Dutch-German border, and one of his proven offenses was done in the Netherlands. Martinet, however, denied having anything to do with the death of Nicky Verstappen when he was finally taken into custody in 2001 for all of his offenses. The police had quite a few suspects on their list as the inquiry went on. In Nicky Verstappen's homicide case, sex offenders like Mark Hoffman and Michel Fournier were thought to be suspects. However, a comprehensive investigation cleared them, and they were never charged with his death. Peter de Vries learned about new methods for testing DNA science in February 2004. The public was then notified, and he instructed the police to re-examine the blood found on Nicky Verstappen's apparel. Letters accusing themselves of killing Nicky were left on his memorial in Bronson in 2005 by an unidentified individual. The letters were linked to a 36-year-old man by investigators. However, it was later discovered that the confession was fraudulent. The individual suffered from serious mental health problems and was a psychiatric patient. According to his therapist, he wrote the letters to attract attention. The individual who had used Nicky Verstappen's tomb was given a 2-week jail sentence. When it appeared that there was no chance left in February 2008, detectives revealed that foreign DNA had been discovered on Nicky's knickers and pajamas. All of the earlier suspects in the case had new tests performed, but the results showed no similarities to the discovered DNA. Still, Nicky's family was supportive. Although it may appear to be yet another dead end, the foreign DNA profile revelation suggested that there was evidence of a male having physical contact with Nicky Verstappen prior to his passing. The family of Nicky prayed and hoped the offender would be apprehended before he could harm anyone else. In order to provide the family with some closure, Nicky Verstappen's sister, Femke, who was in her 20s at the time, publicly pleaded with every guy in the neighborhood to take part in a DNA test in February 2010. Following the appeal, the police compiled a roster of more than 100 men. These soldiers were first sent to Camp Management Search Party. Of the 114 guys, 80 consented to give saliva samples. Despite the relatively strong turnout for the DNA analysis, Peter de Vries used the media once more to entice individuals to participate in the testing. Many of these males appeared to be afraid to give up their DNA samples out of concern that they would be discovered and prosecuted for previous crimes. Nevertheless, 40 more men came forward after Peter de Vries clarified that their DNAs would only be utilized in Nicky Verstappen's case. Even after a thorough examination of the recovered DNA samples, Nicky's clothes was not identified as matching the dent. Juz Barton died in February 2003, and his remains were unearthed for examination in a desperate search for the truth. Since Juz Barton had been the most likely suspect over the years, there was hope at that time. But many were taken aback when Juz Barton's DNA was discovered to differ from that on Nicky Verstappen's clothing. Nicky Verstappen's murder case was moved to a cold case team in the early months of February 2012. The fresh detectives went through every detail of Nicky's case file. Following that, they came upon a group of 1,500 men who were all connected to the area around the campsite where Nicky Verstappen was last seen. The people on the list were either camp staff, neighborhood residents, or sex criminals with official charges. But they were out of luck once more. The police were not easily defeated. In February 2017, they submitted a new request for government aid. They wanted more than 20,000 DNA samples to do a kinship study. As a result, only 15,000 volunteers actually took part in the end. But this DNA dragnet operation was the largest of its kind in Dutch history. It was a long shot, but the last one as there was nothing left to do. Large-scale DNA sweeping is an important effort, and it has raised a number of ethical concerns. If they had nothing to hide, most people think that collaborating was a no-brainer, and their DNA profile might help detectives find the child killer. All the males received letters from the authorities asking for fresh DNA samples. If they didn't respond, police would visit them at home in an effort to convince them to help. Josh Brecht, one of the men, was supposed to bring a sample, but he never did. When 2 police officers arrived at his house, he was not there. The man's family claims that he left for France in February 2012 and never came back. In April, Jos Breeze went missing, according to his family. Before the authorities could locate him and obtain his DNA, he had undoubtedly fled his house and disappeared. Because they were concerned about this man, the authorities' background to find out who he was. Jos Brecht was 35 years old when Nicky Verstappen was murdered. He lived around 12 miles away from the campsite with his mother and Simpelveld. He was an enthusiastic scout who also led camps on a regular basis. He had also worked as a childcare provider in Brunson for a few years. Even though he confessed to the offense, he was not found guilty in a 1985 case involving the sexual abuse of 2 boys, ages 10. His name was never placed to the list of sexual offenders, and he was only given a 2-year probationary period. That's why when all sex offenders were subjected to a DNA search by local police, he managed to avoid discovery. They never mentioned his name. Jos Brecht was in the vicinity of Nicky's disappearance on August 10, 1998. He was riding on a route near the crime scene when he was detained by police at midnight on Tuesday, August 11, 1998. Nicky Verstappen's body had just been found a few hours before the police encountered Jos Brecht, and Nicky's body was being taken from the campsite site to Maastricht for the autopsy when the police saw Jos Brecht. Jos Brecht told the police that he was delivering letters to scout members because it was too hot to be out cycling during the day when they questioned him about why he was out at that time. The cops reasoned that the explanation made sense because it had been a very hot day. But he gave a different account when questioned later during the course of the investigation. The same month that Nicky Verstappen was killed, August 1998, saw the discovery of child pornography on his personal computer. However, Jos Brecht was only able to obtain one of the 15,000 DNA samples that were turned over to the authorities in February 2017. This sample showed a striking resemblance to the foreign DNA that was discovered on Nicky Verstappen. The DNA sample was from a family member of the person whose DNA was discovered on Nicky's clothing. That individual just so happened to be Jos Brecht's relative. Police were getting close to solving the case when they asked Jos Brekker's family if he had left behind a toothbrush or hairbrush so they could develop a DNA profile. His relatives gave the authorities support and some of his personal possessions. At last, after 2 excruciatingly long decades, all the hard work paid off. Beginning in June 2018, forensics established a 100% match between Nicky's pants and pajamas DNA and Jos Breck's Statener. But in order to prevent alerting the criminal, detectives were asked to keep the new information to themselves. Now, the detectives launched a wide-ranging worldwide hunt for Jos Breach. Jos Breach was a survival specialist who led nature expeditions into the highlands in the Vosges mountain region of northern France, where his last known whereabouts was. Remember that he was a seasoned scout member with practical expertise. Jos Brecht had not used his phone or credit cards, so when he left the Vosges, nobody knew where he had gone. Police found that he had become more adept at survival and had started making plans to disappear and live off the grid. His online search history showed that he was well prepared, having studied little villages all throughout Europe in great detail, places Dutch news would not publish. Law officials said that asking the public for help was the only option to pull him out of his hiding place. At a news conference on August 22, 2018, it was disclosed that DNA samples from Jos Brecht's personal belongings matched the DNA found on Verstappen's clothing. They revealed his identity and age at the time. Because of Dutch privacy rules and the presumption that a person is innocent unless and until proven guilty, it's common practice to merely use a surname's initial letter. But this case was special because Jos Brecht had to be located with the help of law enforcement. The public appeal was successful because the week after the press conference, Jos Brecht was identified, and his whereabouts were reported to the police by a Dutch citizen in northern Spain who had seen his photo in the newspaper. Jos Brecht was residing in the northern Barcelona town of Castellterçol in a tent close to a community house. On August 26, 2018, 20 years after Nicky Verstappen passed away, Jos Brecht was placed under arrest. His identity was confirmed by the passport he was carrying when he was taken into custody. On September 6, 2018, he left the Netherlands and made his first court appearance in December of the same year. After Jos Brecht was arrested, Peter de Vries celebrated alongside the family of Nicky Verstappen. There was a great sense of success and relief. Jos Brecht had already admitted to child abuse and had been questioned in 2001 about his presence near the crime site the night Nicky's body was found. "Yes, I can understand why you would want to speak with me," he answered, referring to his past run-ins with the law over child abuse. There was no investigation into this claim or collection of a DNA sample. Although Jos Brecht wasn't officially on the list of sexual offenders, he had unintentionally put himself on it. If only Jos Brecht had been thoroughly investigated by the police back then, this case would have been solved long ago. In Majastric, the trial got underway in December 2018. Rather than murder, Jos Brecht was charged with manslaughter. The charge of manslaughter is less severe. Unlike in a murder case, there is insufficient evidence to establish that the murder was planned out beforehand. Jos Brecht entered a not guilty plea in court and defended himself by claiming that his DNA was found on Nicky's clothing when he was out for a stroll at the camp area's edge and noticed something in the distance. When he went to investigate out of curiosity, he discovered Nicky's body. He claimed that because of his prior convictions, he had looked for signs of life, brushed leaves off the body, and then left without taking any more action. The prosecution countered that Nicky's body had 27 distinct locations where Jos Brecht's DNA had been discovered, including his pants. Even yet, Jos Brecht insisted on his innocence, claiming he had no idea how his DNA got onto Nicky's panties. Following his trial, Jos Brecht was found guilty. On January 28, 2022, an appeal court declared him guilty of manslaughter and gave him a 16-year prison sentence. Even if the Verstappen family could have some answers, will they ever be satisfied? Their boy will never grow older, even as his friends do, because he will always be 11 years old. They are tormented by innumerable unsolved issues on a daily basis, like, would Nicky have grown up to fulfill his dream of becoming a professional soccer player? They have been hurt, and they have lost faith in humanity. Even though Femke Verstappen is an adult with a child of her own, she still follows her mother's tradition of lighting a candle for Nikki every day, and having fresh flowers about the house. The Florence Salon Murder. The morning of Tuesday, November 6, 2001, began like any other for the patrons and employees of the Hair Gallery, a hair and nail salon located off Route 93 in Florence, Montana. At 11 a.m., a client arrived for her scheduled appointment. As she parked, she noticed something unusual. Someone was exiting through the salon's front door, which was rarely used. The salon typically used the rear entrance for daily operations. She watched as the individual, who appeared to be a man, walked away wearing an oversized black duster-style coat and a wide-brimmed hat, possibly a fedora or a top hat. After he disappeared from view, the customer proceeded to the back entrance, only to find a horrifying scene. 62-year-old Dorothy Harris, the salon's owner, lying lifeless in a pool of blood just inside the door. In shock, the woman rushed inside and called the police. When police arrived at the Hair Gallery, the grim scene only worsened. In a utility closet in the back room, they discovered the bodies of two more women, 44-year-old Brenda Patch, the salon's nail technician, and 71-year-old Cynthia Paulus, a regular customer. Both had suffered the same brutal fate as Dorothy Harris. Their throats had been cut. The crime immediately puzzled investigators. There was no apparent sexual motive, and nothing had been stolen from the premises. Even the salon's cash drawer remained untouched. Dorothy had made her usual Tuesday morning trip to the bank in Stevensville just 30 minutes before her body was found. Since the drive from Stevensville takes around 15 to 20 minutes, detectives believe the killer had a very short window to act. They theorized that Brenda had opened the salon and let Cynthia in for her appointment, and that the two were killed first, possibly forced to their knees in the utility closet, where signs of a struggle were evident. Despite the brutality of the attack, the lack of a clear motive, no robbery, no known personal grudges, left authorities with more questions than answers. Would you like a timeline of the events or more details about the investigation suspects? One officer likened the state of the closet to a battle scene. They also believed that the perpetrator had waited for Dorothy to return before taking her life. It has been stated that all three women sustained other injuries outside the cuts to their throats. But the authorities have declined to elaborate on what those injuries are, outside of noting they were not of a sexual nature. Very little evidence was discovered at the scene, and investigators have declined to give details. Looking into the personal lives of all three women, the police failed to find any reason that may have led to their deaths. They were unable to even determine who, if anyone, was specifically targeted. While there has been some speculation that Dorothy was the main focus since the culprit appeared to have waited for her return, it has been argued that she may have simply stumbled onto the scene and was killed for that reason alone. It has also been theorized that the person responsible for the murders was someone who'd committed a crime of opportunity and picked the women at random. The crime had occurred in broad daylight in a tiny town of fewer than 1,000 residents, where it was commonplace for doors to be left unlocked. Not only did this lead to panic among the residents, but it led to the idea that someone outside the community was responsible, that someone had passed through just to commit the crime, and then left. The man who was seen leaving the salon at 11 a.m. is considered a suspect. Investigators believe that the customer who found Dorothy's body had arrived on the scene just minutes after the murders occurred. Furthermore, other witnesses came forward to the authorities following the crime and stated that they had also seen the oddly dressed man. He is described as being in his 20s or early 30s with narrow facial features and is around 6 feet tall. According to local gossip, there is some speculation that the perpetrator is a woman. However, this is unsubstantiated and law enforcement does not support this theory. Witnesses who saw the man said he was walking with a purpose. Using this lead, the police had scent dogs trace the man's movements. They followed his scent through a nearby alleyway, through a dirt car park off a local restaurant, the Wild River, through several back streets, and then to a school parking lot. The canine lost the scent in a nearby pasture 4 blocks from the crime scene. However, a second scent dog led the police from the pasture to a nearby home. The resident, however, was physically unable to have carried out the crime and was promptly ruled out of the investigation. One other similar crime then occurred almost a year later on September 4, 2002. Although it took place in Great Bend, Kansas, about 1,300 miles from Florence. On the afternoon of the 4th, a customer pulled into the parking lot of the Dolly Madison Cake Discount Bakery at 1004 Harrison Street. The customer immediately noticed a man they didn't recognize locking up outside the front door. He told the customer as they approached that the bakery was closed for the day. The customer thought this was odd since it was early in the day but thought nothing of it and returned home. Later that evening, however, a delivery driver entered the bakery using the back entrance and was horrified to see 2 dead bodies on the floor. The victims were 24-year-old Mandy Alexander, who'd been an employee for just 3 days, and 79-year-old Mary Drake, a customer. Both women had been stabbed to death. Like the crime in Florence, investigators struggled to find a motive for the deaths of Mandy and Mary. While a small amount of cash had been taken from the register, the bags and purses of the 2 women were left untouched. Neither victim had been sexually assaulted, and law enforcement found nothing in their backgrounds to indicate why they had been targeted. Like the case in Florence, it seemed totally random. The customer who'd seen the man locking up earlier that day helped investigators create a composite sketch which was distributed throughout the town. It noted that the suspect stood around 6'1", weighed around 175 pounds, was between the ages of 30 and 35, and had light brown or blonde to color-length hair. A worker at a nearby motel recognized the description and told the police about a transient man who checked in on the 4th and checked out the following day. The man had shaved his head before leaving. Still, both the transient man and the suspect from the bakery have never been identified. In the years since, law enforcement have stated their belief that the 2 cases are linked but once more declined to give further details. In February 2005, authorities revealed that they had identified a suspect in the Florence case. Brian Weber, at the time of the crime, had been living in Nampa, Idaho, about 375 miles away. A small-time drug dealer who sold meth, Weber was also an addict himself, which had led to him becoming increasingly violent. He eventually began to engage in petty criminal behavior to help fund his habits. Weber was questioned shortly after the Florence's slayings had occurred and his DNA was taken. Weber was questioned about whether his DNA might be found at the scene, but he stated he hadn't been inside the building since it was used as a post office before it became the salon. He later admitted to being under the influence during the interview and was unclear about the questions and his responses. In February 2003, he was arrested following an assault related to a methamphetamine deal. By February 2004, he faced multiple drug-related charges and received a 24-year prison sentence. Over time, he continued to deny involvement in the case. Authorities claimed he made suggestive remarks to 2 different inmates. A wired informant tried to obtain a confession but was unsuccessful after being detected. His attorneys eventually secured a reduction of his sentence to 10 years. Another individual under scrutiny was Lincoln Benavides, a longtime drug user from Idaho. As a teenager, Benavides lived on the streets with his sister, and he began to run into trouble with law enforcement from the age of 13. Like Weber, Benavides began dealing drugs and soon became a career criminal. In February 2008, authorities alleged that both men knew each other and they were responsible for multiple assaults and drug offenses together. The 2 were then charged with the triple murders. The indictment alleged that the slayings were carried out as part of a collection of a drug debt and that Benavides was the leader of a drug distribution ring which operated throughout Idaho and Montana between 1999 and February 2001. It also claimed that Weber worked as a violent enforcer for the organization. The indictment read in parts, quote, "On occasion, Weber would threaten other dealers or beat them in order to facilitate the collection of money for the organization. On occasion, Brian Weber and Lincoln Benavides would together threaten or beat someone. Little evidence was revealed at the time. Authorities stated that much of the detail in the case would be revealed during the trial. Benavides was not believed to have physically committed the murders, but was accused of directing, encouraging, or facilitating the killings. The indictment also highlighted that both he and Weber left the States soon after the crimes, with Benavides even leaving the country before returning to Texas a few months later. Prior to trial, Benavides accepted a plea agreement. The murder charges were dropped and he received a 25-year sentence for drug-related offenses. Weber's exoneration came later, in 2010, when evidence confirmed he was not in Montana at the time of the murders. This, combined with the death of the prosecution's only credible witness, most others being inmates or individuals with criminal backgrounds, in February 2008, caused the case to collapse. In February 2018, Weber was sentenced to 15 years in prison for drug offenses, with an additional 10 years of supervised release. The case against Weber and Benavides has drawn significant criticism, as many believe the prosecution built a weak case and that local authorities may have attempted to coerce confessions from the two men under pressure to secure a conviction. Since their names were cleared, no new arrests or meaningful developments have occurred in the investigation. The Florence Salon murders are still unsolved. If you have any information about the case, you can contact the Ravalli County Sheriff's Office at 406-375-4024. Moving on to the next case. Mary Boyle. Mary Boyle is a name well known to many in Ireland, associated with one of the country's most heartbreaking and contentious missing persons cases. Often referred to as Ireland's Madeleine McCann, Mary's disappearance remains the longest-running investigation involving a missing child in the Republic of Ireland. Born on June 14, 1970, Mary was a bright, outgoing 6-year-old with a lively personality. She had a close-knit family, including her older brother, Paddy, and her twin sister, and to whom she was especially close. Mary was known to be the more daring of the twins. Though she was born in Birmingham, her family relocated to Ballyshannon, Ireland, in the early 1970s. The last confirmed sighting of Mary occurred around 3:30 p.m. on March 18, 1977. Mary had been playing outdoors with her siblings and cousins near her grandparents' remote farm, where the family had been staying since St. Patrick's Day on March 17. During the afternoon, she noticed her uncle heading off to return a ladder to a nearby neighbor and decided to follow him. However, when they reached a large bog, she gave up and turned back toward the house on her own. The return trip should have taken just a few minutes, but Mary never made it home. Her uncle remained at the neighbor's property for about half an hour, engaged in conversation. As time passed and Mary failed to return, her family grew concerned and began searching the surrounding area, asking anyone nearby if they had seen the child. One report from the Irish Independent mentioned a fisherman who claimed to have seen Mary being abducted in a red Volkswagen Beetle. However, he later clarified in a BBC podcast that he hadn't witnessed an abduction, but had seen a suspicious red car in the vicinity around the time of her disappearance. When the Garda arrived on the scene, they sprung into action, draining bogs in the area in an attempt to uncover her body. The lake behind Mary's grandparents' house was also drained and authorities filmed a reconstruction of her last known movements using her twin sister Anne. A famous Irish country music star named Margot O'Donnell, who was a friend and distant relative of the family, caught wind of the case and funded searches for Mary on the surrounding hillside by selling new music. Searches have been regularly carried out since 1977, but so far, Mary has never been located. Mary's case is extremely controversial. There are unclear details, conflicting reports, and allegations of corruption surrounding it. It is widely believed that a politician stops law enforcement from detaining and questioning a prime suspect in the case. Thus, it has never been solved. One of the loudest voices supporting this belief is a right-wing journalist named Gemma O'Doherty. O'Doherty is a determined journalist who has not only written about the case in publications, case called Mary Boyle, The Untold Truth. The documentary is available to watch on YouTube, although O'Doherty herself was banned from the platform in 2019 for repeatedly violating YouTube's hate speech policies. O'Doherty is largely considered to be a controversial character herself. She's known to be a racist anti-vaxxer with anti-LGBTQ+ beliefs. Reportedly, her news-gathering ethics have also been called into question in the past. That said, her theory pertaining to Mary's case can't be entirely discredited, as there are several pieces of evidence supporting corruption and a cover-up. In her documentary, Gemma suggests the theory that Mary was sexually abused and murdered. Her sister and several other relatives have publicly claimed that they know what happened to the 6-year-old and they know who the culprit is, and supports O'Doherty's theory and says the perpetrator is still alive and still living in the country. In the documentary, Anne can be heard saying, "I believe Mary had a secret. I believe Mary had to be killed to stop her telling." This allegation has come at a personal cost, and is now estranged from her mother, and deep divisions have formed within the Boyle family due to differing opinions about what happened. In February 2016, the twins' mother also named and dismissed the renewed public appeals as the most ridiculous carry-on I have ever seen in my life. Margot O'Donnell later recounted confronting the politician believed to have blocked the questioning of the main suspect. He denied any interference and accused Margot of being a barefaced liar. The original suspect was let go without any charges and was never publicly named in the media. Journalist Gemma O'Doherty has claimed that the politician involved was not only close friends with the suspect, but also maintained a strong rapport with the superintendent overseeing the investigation. Former Detective Sergeant Aidan Murray corroborated this, stating that he had nearly secured a confession from the suspect before being ordered by a superior to back off. Murray also said he witnessed a phone call between the politician and police instructing officers not to pursue further questioning. The politician in question is believed to have been Sean McKenniff, who died in February 2017. When still alive, McKenniff was supposedly surrounded by accusations of sexual abuse and grooming. Mary's uncle, Jerry Gallagher, reportedly worked for him. Many believe that Jerry Gallagher is responsible for the disappearance of his niece, and Boyle has never outright accused her uncle, but armchair detectives have put two and two together. According to O'Doherty's documentary, Gallagher gave conflicting statements over the years and apparently didn't even admit that Mary had been with him when she initially went missing. The documentary is not without its criticisms, even from those who starred in it, but it does give viewers some compelling information. Even if no politicians were involved, it appears that law enforcement's efforts to find the murderer of a 6-year-old girl were severely lacking. Other suspects in Mary's case are few and far between. In 2014, a man named Brian McCann, who had been jailed for 2 years for several sex offenses just a few years before, was pulled in for questioning, but later released without charge. He has publicly denied any involvement with the 6-year-old's disappearance. Another man who was considered a suspect for a time was the infamous Scottish serial killer and pedophile, Robert Black. He was thought to have been involved when authorities discovered that he was a cross-border truck driver who, as part of his job, often visited that same county from which Mary vanished. He was even known to have been in the area at the time of her disappearance. One witness even claimed they heard crying coming from the back of his van, which was parked outside of a pub in the village of Anagri. However, he has since been dismissed as a suspect. According to the Gardaí, Mary's case remains active, though her family has expressed little confidence in the investigation and doubts they will ever find justice. In February 2018, a silent demonstration took place outside the coroner's office in Strandorler. Protesters called for an official inquest into Mary's disappearance, which would allow key witnesses to give sworn public testimony for the first time. A petition with 10,000 signatures was submitted in support of the inquest. However, this effort did not lead to any formal proceedings, and there are reports suggesting that Mary's mother has consistently opposed the idea of holding an inquest. Multiple theories persist regarding what happened to Mary. A common belief is that Jerry Gallagher may have been involved and that Gemma O'Doherty's allegations of a cover-up are credible. Others have speculated about the behavior of Mary's mother, suggesting that the family might have been complicit in concealing what occurred. There is also a theory that Mary may have died in an accident that was never reported, or that she never actually left the house, implying the possibility of her death occurring inside the cottage. Mary's father tragically died in a fishing accident in February 2005. The rest of the family remains split by their opinions on what really happened to the little girl. To this day, her case is still unsolved. Moving on to the next case. The Ansai shootings. At 3:45 p.m. on September 5, 2012, multiple gunshots were fired on a roadside turnout near Cheveling, close to the southern edge of Lake Annecy in France. Brett Martin, a British former RAF pilot, came upon the aftermath while cycling nearby. Due to the noise of the nearby river, he hadn't heard the shots and only discovered the grisly scene as he followed his usual route. The first sign of the tragedy was 7-year-old Zainab Al-Hali, who, against all odds, was still alive. Investigations later revealed that Zainab had been shot in the shoulder and struck on the head with the weapon. She managed to make her way out to the road before collapsing in front of her family's BMW. The car was still running, the doors locked, and its windows riddled with bullet holes. Inside were the bodies of 3 adults, 50-year-old Saad al-Hili, his 47-year-old wife Iqbal, and her 74-year-old mother Suhaila al-Alef. Saad and Iqbal were British citizens of Iraqi origin, while Suhaila held Swedish citizenship. The BMW had been sharply reversed into the lay by leaving visible marks on the road, and it was still in reverse gear when Brett arrived on the scene. Its rear wheels spun in loose sand. Each victim had been shot twice in the head. There was one more body lying in the roads, Sylvain Mollier, a 45-year-old Frenchman who'd been out cycling when he was caught in the crosshairs. He had been shot 7 times. The El-Hili family's youngest daughter, just 4 years old, was later found by forensic investigators hidden beneath her deceased mother's legs in the rear footwell of the car. She had remained there for 8 hours but was found physically unharmed. Ballistics analysis of cartridge casings and fragments from the pistols but plate revealed that the murders had been committed using a Luger P06 semi-automatic pistol. This firearm, which fires 7.65 by 21 mm parabellum rounds from an 8-round magazine, is typically viewed as a collector's item, though it had once been exported to the US and adopted by the Swiss Army. While not particularly powerful, the weapon is known for its accuracy and reliability. The case, which resulted in 4 deaths and left a child injured, was investigated by both the French National Gendarmerie's criminal and forensic divisions. In September 2012, a joint task force was also formed between British and French authorities to help move the case forward. However, the scene yielded very little useful evidence. The location, a picnic area, provided limited clues, and those that were uncovered pointed in different directions. Some aspects of the case, such as the calculated execution-style killings and the brutal targeting of a child, suggested the involvement of a professional assassin. On the other hand, the perpetrator had left behind 21 shell casings and had used a very distinct and uncommon weapon. Much like the Florence case we discussed earlier, investigators working on the Ansai shooting struggled to find an obvious motive. For some time, it was theorized that 50-year-old Saad was the main target of the attack, that his family were collective damage, and that Sylvain was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Saad and Iqbal had been living in the UK for over 20 years, with Saad working as an engineer and Iqbal a dentist. The couple's neighbors and friends had nothing but good things to say about the family. Saad, by all accounts, was a doting father, while Iqbal was a devoted wife and mother. There were rumors during the initial investigation that the father of 2 worked around some sensitive topics due to his career. A French newspaper named Le Mans alleged that Saad had access to a Swiss bank accounts that belonged to Saddam Hussein's political party. The paper claimed that they had obtained this information from the German Secret Service. However, there is no evidence to connect Saad to Saddam Hussein. The Swiss bank account that has been linked to the 50-year-old is actually his father's. Saad's father, Kadim, was a lawyer and businessman who moved the family to the UK in 1971, after his brother was arrested by Iraq's intelligence agency and vanished for a year. When he returned, he had slurred speech and brain damage, which prompted Kadim to move his family to safety. While the family moved, Kadim returned to Iraq in 1974 to continue running his businesses. He retired in 1982, moving permanently to the UK. When he passed away, he left behind $1 million in a Swiss bank account for his 2 sons, Saad and Zaid, as well as properties in England and Spain. Following his passing, the 2 brothers began to argue about who should get what. This disagreement was still ongoing when Saad was killed. Upon learning all this information, authorities turned their attention to Zaid, believing he had a motive to want his brother dead. Zaid, for his parts, didn't believe Saad was a victim of a professional hit. Zaid pointed out that if someone had truly wanted to kill his brother, it would have been far simpler to do so in the UK, where Saad had a predictable routine and lived at a permanent residence. He also emphasized that Saad's job never granted him access to sensitive information. Nonetheless, on September 28, just a few weeks after the murders, authorities executed a search warrant at Saad's home. While examining the crime scene, investigators had discovered that Saad possessed a taser, a weapon illegal in the UK. This led them to believe he may have feared for his or his family's safety. In conversations with other relatives, police learned that Saad had allegedly expressed fear of his brother. However, the search of Zaid's property yielded no evidence linking him to the killings. Even without physical evidence, investigators continued to treat Zaid as a primary suspect, subjecting him to repeated interrogations over the next 7 to 8 months. Some of these sessions reportedly lasted up to 8 hours. In June 2013, French authorities requested Zaid's presence as a witness, but he declined to appear. Later that same month, he was arrested on suspicion of conspiracy to commit murder, with investigators theorizing that his motive was to inherit the entirety of their father's estate. However, the case quickly fell apart as there was still no evidence connecting Zaid to the crime. Zaid continued to maintain his innocence and suggested that Sylvain was the true target of the attack. Sylvain was a divorced father of 3 who worked as a welder at a factory which crafted components for nuclear reactors. The 45-year-old's career choice led to wild speculation that he and Saad knew one another and that the two were in cahoots. However, there is no evidence to support these suggestions. Authorities have found no evidence to indicate Sylvain was the main targets, and this lack of motive and evidence has led to the idea that the 4 adults were killed by a lone psychopath, someone who killed for the sake of killing with no motive and no specific target in mind. This is supported by the fact that neither Sylvain nor the Al-Healy family intended on being on that road at the time of the shootings. Sylvain had been out on a bike ride using a route that had been suggested by his girlfriend's father, but he had gotten lost and somehow turned around on the way. Similarly, the Al-Healy family had only decided that morning to go for a walk, and they had been given directions by a going with the lone psychopath theory. Law enforcement cross-referenced military records with psychiatric visits, but found nothing of use. In April of 2014, while going through a list of everyone Sylvain's girlfriend knew, they came across a man named Patrice Menegaldo. Detectives called him in for an interview, which lasted an hour. They hoped he might have been privy to some information about Sylvain that they had not seen. Patrice was a 50-year-old former paratrooper in the French Foreign Legion, but appeared to have no useful information about the cyclist. 2 months after his interview, he took his own life. The note he left behind read in parts that he couldn't handle being a suspect in a murder. This struck investigators as odd, as they had never named him as a suspect or even a person of interest. They had not treated him as such either, and overall had no reason to think he was involved. His sudden suicide, however, led to some speculation that he was the lone psychopath. After all, he had a military background and was mentally unwell. Still, many find it odd that he waited 2 months before taking his own life if he was truly the perpetrator and was scared of getting caught. It's unknown what other information his last letter contains, as it has never been made public understandably. There is no evidence tying Patrice to the murders. 1 month later, in July of 2014, it came to light that Saad's wife, Iqbal, had briefly married an American police officer in 1999. The pair had quickly split up, and only a few people knew of their marriage. 7 hours after the demise of Sylvain and the Al-Healy family, the former police officer, James Thompson, told a friend that he wasn't feeling well. He died of a massive coronary while driving home. While there was nothing suspicious about James's death, he was unhealthy and unwell. The bizarre timing of the death caused even investigators in France to give pause. The final theory in the Ants shootings is that a child rapist and killer named Nordal Lowlandis was involved. In 2022, a man previously convicted of multiple serious offenses was examined for possible connections to the case, but no direct link was established. Given the nature of his past crimes, it seemed inconsistent that he would have spared 2 young survivors. A reconstruction of the victims' final movements was conducted in 2021. In early 2025, a previously interviewed individual was questioned again. Though he was briefly held, authorities quickly confirmed he was no longer considered a suspect. The investigation remains open,